Hi math class, I hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to another math video. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at lesson 64, parts 1 through 5. So let's get started. So let's look at part 1. You're going to write fractions and names for sentences. Learning to do this is very important because you'll need it later on when we solve harder word problems. So each sentence tells you about a fraction. So let's look at fraction number A. So the sentence says, there were 3 girls for every 4 boys. The words girls and boys are underlined. So here's what we need to write. So for part A, right, we have to have girls will be on the top of our fraction, and boys will be on the bottom of our fraction. Now we'll write the numbers for girls and the numbers for boys. So if we look, it tells us that there were 3 girls for every 4 boys, right? So for every 3 girls, there were 4 boys. So we write the fraction 3 over 4. So let's look at part B. In part B, we have the sentence, there were 5 cars for every 2 trucks, right? So cars will be our top number, and trucks will be our bottom number. There we are. And then, once again, it tells us that there were 5 cars for every 2 trucks. So for every 5 cars, there were 2 trucks, right? So these are our 2 ratios that we had to write. Once again, in part A, we had to write for every 3 girls, there were 4 boys. And then for part B, we wrote the ratio for the fraction, or for the sentence, that there were 5 cars for every 2 trucks. So what I want you guys to do now is to work on problems C, D, and E. Once again, you're going to put the words into a fraction, and then whatever word you put where, you'll have to put the correct number. So for part C, it tells us there were 16 cats for every 7 dogs. You'll put cats at the top. You can put dogs on the bottom, right? And then your fraction will be 16 over 7 because there were 16 cats for every 7 dogs. So you can pause the video now, and then I'll see you guys in part B, or in part 2. So find part 2. You're going to write each problem as each multiplication problem as a division problem. So what we need to do is first solve the multiplication problem, and then we're going to rewrite it as a division problem. So in part A, we have 7 multiplied by a number equals 56, and then we have to write it as a fraction right beside. Let me just write that down. And then here we are. Right, 7 multiplied by what number will give us 56? We can skip count by 7s. You can look at your multiplication chart. Right, we know that 7 multiplied by 8 will give us 56. And now we have to organize it in our division problem. Right, so we have the number 56. The number that comes after the equal sign will always go underneath your division sign. Our first number, the number 7, will go before our division sign. And then the number 8 is what we solved for, will go right at the top, right above the 6 in our 56. So once again, what we need to do for part 2 is first solve for the missing number in the multiplication problem. And then the number that comes after the equal sign will go underneath your division problem. The first number in your multiplication question will go right in front of the division problem. And then the missing number that we tried to find will go right at the top. So you can pause the video now and work on parts B through F. So once again, first answer and solve the missing number in the multiplication problem, and then you're going to write that problem as a division problem. So you can pause the video now, and then I will see you guys in part 3. So welcome back, and let's look at part 3. So for part 3, this is what it tells us in our book. Each table is supposed to show the number of bluebirds and redbirds in 2 different places. Table A shows the forest and the city, and Table B shows the mountains and the valley. There aren't enough numbers in these tables, and there are no check marks. But the fact number under each table tells you how to get one more number. So what we need to do is to look at these 2 tables. So let's look at table A. I will quickly write it down. So just give me 1 second. So we are looking at how many bluebirds and redbirds there were in the forest and in the city. So we have blue, red, and then we have the total. Then we have the forest, city, and then the total. If we look, we only have a few numbers written down. So it tells us that there are 70 bluebirds in the forest. There are 35 redbirds in the city. The total number of birds in the city is 89. And the total number of birds in both the forest and the city is 200. Right, so these are the numbers that we are given. On the very bottom, we have a fact. So listen, the first part of each fact tells the row or the column that you'll look at. The second part of each fact tells the 2 things that are compared. That tells you what the 2 cells to put the check marks in. So what we're trying to figure out is how, using this fact, how can we solve for one of these making a number family? So we're not going to solve for all of these missing numbers. All we're going to do is use this fact to help us solve for one number family. So I'll read the fact for table A. In the forest, there were 29 more bluebirds than redbirds. So the first part of that fact says, in the forest. So that tells you the row or the column we're going to be looking at. So we're going to be looking at in the forest. So put your finger over the row or column for the forest, right? So we're going to be looking at this. The second part of the fact tells the things that are compared. There were 29 more bluebirds than redbirds. Right, so the 2 things we're comparing is the bluebirds, so I'll put a check mark, and the redbirds. So now that we've put a check in both of these columns, we can solve for the missing number. So using the fact once again, in the forest, there were 29 more bluebirds than redbirds. So we're going to be looking at in the forest, and we're going to be looking at bluebirds and redbirds. So right underneath, I'll make that number family. In our fact, it has our keyword more, so I know this is going to be our difference problem. If we look, the number right beside our keyword, right, was 29. So 29 will be our difference number. In the question, it also tells us that there were more bluebirds than redbirds. So bluebirds will be our big number and redbirds will be our small number. Right? We have that there were 70 bluebirds, so that will be the number for that. So what we have to solve is how many redbirds there were. Right? I have my first small number. For the redbirds, that's what we're trying to find. That's also my small number. And then we have our big number, which is 70. So what I have to do is subtract 70 and 29. So 70 minus 29 will give me, right? I can't do 0 minus 9. I'm going to have to borrow. 10 minus 9 is 1. 6 minus 2 is 4. So we know that there were 41 redbirds in the forest. And that's all we have to solve for. So all we had to do is we had to read the key fact. Once again, the first part of the fact told us which column or row we were going to look at. So it said in the forest, right? So I found where it said the forest and we're looking at this. The second part of the fact told us that there were 29 more bluebirds than redbirds. So it told us what two things we're comparing, right? These two. So then we had to make our difference or our number family. Using the fact, we knew that 29 would be our difference number. We had the number 70, so that would be our big number. And then we had to solve for how many redbirds there were. So now let's look at part B. Let me just quickly write it down. And we're going to do the exact same thing. All we have to do is once again read our fact, find out which column or row it's talking about, and then we have to find the missing numbers. Let me just quickly draw this here. So once again, we're looking at bluebirds and redbirds, but this time, instead of the forest and in the city, they're going to be in the mountains and in the valley. Mountain and valley. There we are. And then we're told that there are 76 bluebirds in the mountain. There are 107 redbirds in the valley. And there are 133 total there are 133 redbirds in both places. Just like that. So right underneath we have our fact. The fact says, in the valley, there were 72 fewer bluebirds than redbirds. Right? So the first part of that question tells us which column or row to look at. So it says in the valley. So I'm going to be looking at the valley. There were 72 fewer bluebirds than redbirds. Right? So I'm going to put a check mark beside the valley that has the blue and the redbirds. These two check marks, that's to show that these numbers will be in my number family that I'm going to have to make. So let me draw my number family right underneath. Once again, we're only making one number family using the fact that's given. So it tells us there were 72 fewer bluebirds than redbirds. Right? So fewer is our keyword. So the number right beside that keyword is 72. So 72 will be our difference number. We know that there were fewer bluebirds than redbirds, so bluebirds will be our small number, and redbirds will be our big number. If we look, we are given that there were 107 redbirds, so what we need to find is how many bluebirds there were. So now, I want you guys to try to solve for this number. So we have our number family all organized. We know that the difference number is 72. We have our two things that we're comparing, the number of bluebirds, which is our small number, the number of redbirds, which is our big number, and we know that there's 107 redbirds. So all you guys have to do is solve for that, and then write that number in right here. So you guys can pause the video now, solve your number family, and then I will see you in part 4. So welcome back to part 4. So great job in our last section. So that was something new that we did. So we'll continue to review it. So don't worry. If you have any questions, please let me know. So in part 4, it asks us, so we're looking at fractions and you guys need to complete the equations. So we're going to be practicing our division. So for number 1, it is 9 divided by 1 or 9 over 1. Right? So it's asking us how many times does 1 go into 9? So our answer will be 9. For part B, we have the fraction 4 over 4, but it can also be read as a division problem. 4 divided by 4, right? So 4 goes into 4 only one time, so 1 is your answer. So you guys, please complete the rest of the questions for part 4. So you can pause the video now, and then I'll see you in part 5. So welcome back to part 5. For this part, you're going to need to use the image that I attached. So we're going to be looking at parts A and B. We'll do part A together, and then what I want you guys to do is try to do part B. So it asks us to write the fraction for the first picture. Then write an equation to show the fractions in the row that are equal to the first fraction. So if you look at part A, the first fraction, let me show you here if I can, we're going to first write the fraction for this picture, and then we're going to see if any of the other pictures are equal to this fraction. So the best way to do that is to use a pencil. If I put my pencil right here, I can see that 2 of the fractions are equal to the first fraction, right? So those fractions are going to be this fraction and this fraction. So all we have to do now is write an equal sign or an equation to show that they're all equal. So if we look at that first image, we have to write the fraction. So I can count that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 parts are shaded. Remember, the parts that are shaded will be your top number. So my 8 will be my top number. And then if we're looking at how many parts are in 1 unit, I'm going to look only at the first box, right? And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my first fraction for the image is 8 over 6. 8 parts were shaded, and then there were 6 parts in 1 unit. So now I'm trying to find what other 2 fractions are going to be equal to this fraction. So by using my pencil, I saw that fraction number 2 and fraction number 3 were equivalent to this fraction. So once again, all I have to do now is write the fraction for those images. In the second image, after this fraction, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 parts that are shaded, so that will be my top number. And then there are 3 parts in 1 unit, so my fraction will be 4 over 3, or 4/3. And then in the last image, in part A, we said that that is also equivalent or equal to the first image. So if we count, there are 12 parts that are shaded. Remember, that will be your top number. And then we need to count how many parts are in 1 unit. And there are 9. So 9 will be the bottom number. So what we said is the first image that we were given is 8 over 6, and then we found 2 other fractions that were equal to that, or 2 other images, and then we just wrote the fractions for those images. The top number of your fraction will always be how many parts are shaded, and the bottom number in your fraction will always be how many parts are in 1 unit. So what I want you guys to do is to look at the fraction in part B. The first image will be the first fraction that you write. Right, so there are 2 parts shaded, and we can count that there are 4 parts in 1 unit. So that, for part B, will be, your fraction will be 2 over 4. Then 2 of the other images are equal to that first image. Your job will be to find what those images are, and then to write the fractions for those images. So great job in today's class, and I'll see you in our next lesson.